We're going to change it up a little bit because normally we start with either Matt or Josh. I'm going to start tonight, but before I do, I'm going to have Matt read the numbers for our first album, which is the band Madness, our second time covering them. We're going to be covering Presents The Rise and Fall is the name of the album. So Matt, take it away.
So Madness's The Rise and Fall comes in at 946 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 100 in 1982, number 6,193 of all time. It's Madness's third highest rated album, behind the first one, which is One Step Beyond, which is an album that we covered a little while back, and an album called Absolutely from 1980, which we are not covering. It did not make Rolling Stone's list. There's only one album tonight that made Rolling Stone's list. This is not that one. Madness is also ranked number 903 of all time of overall artist rankings in Best Ever Albums. John, how do we get this album? Where is this coming from?
1,001 albums, my friend.
Okay.
Yep.
And Absolutely, I guess, is not on there. So, yeah.
I told Matt, I think last week when he said, ooh, good, some more ska. I said, I don't know, Matt. I don't think this is going to be ska. I'm pretty much after the first two Madness albums, Madness goes in a different direction. Yeah. And I think this album probably is most known for containing Our House, which is certainly the biggest hit that they had in America. By far. Yeah, it's really the only hit, unless you were in the genre, right? Now, in Britain, they had considerably more top 10 hits, right? And a couple different songs we covered on One Step Beyond, and then a couple songs also on their second album as well. So there was stuff there. But this Baggy Trousers, I always think of from their second album, is like a big hit in Britain. But this is much more akin, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb, and I have a feeling both of you guys were going to get to the same spot. But this is clearly like inspired to some degree by the Kinks, I think, in terms of the nature of it as a concept album and the title, right, and just the overall sonic palette. And not surprisingly, I go in to try to get a little bit of context of the album without, as I said before, not allowing it to affect my notes. So I make notes on the album for these cold listen hot takes before I do it. But yeah, it comes up often that I think often I read that this is sort of the British album that's between like the Kinks' Village Green Preservation and like Blur later Park Life, which is another slice of English life type album that we'll be covering in the 90s. And that's really what this is. This is just, it's kind of a genre crapshoot, I'd think, but more like pop songs that sort of talk about British life in 1982. I think one of the interesting things is I always think of the music from Britain, a lot of it, right? Either being in the late 70s and early 80s, I should say, either being very aggressive, and dark and dour. And we've covered a lot of that stuff, right, so far, like, the industrial stuff, the punk and stuff like that, even some of that, or sort of being escapist, like, new romantic, right, or new wave stuff like that. This kind of is more nostalgic, I'd say, and definitely grounded in pop. Madness is always an interesting band for me because I did say in the One Step Beyond, they're of all the ska bands, I feel like they're less a ska band, and so I don't really call them a ska band. They just happen to make a very ska first album, I'd say, that got lumped in with a movement, but I always felt like they were movement adjacent, so to speak. The album was hit and miss for me. There were some songs. Our House is just a tremendous pop song, and there's a reason it crossed over so well. And then there's other songs on this album that I thought were really interesting concepts. You can't listen to Madness without hearing the horns. I think more than almost any other band in that era, it's almost impossible for me to detach them from the sounds of sort of the working class horns, I'd say, that they have in there. And the songs usually build to a very earnest chorus, I would say, is another staple of them. It's a lot of neighborhood songs, like talking about the neighborhood. I mean, as literally as Primrose Hill and Our House at different times. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. I've got more to say on it. I'd say in terms of as an initial hot take, I'd say I was kind of in the middle because there were through lines of the album that were a little bit overly nostalgic to me. I'll be interested to see what like Matt thinks and Josh thinks, because I know they were higher on the version of the Kinks that was the Village Preservation version. Arthur especially. I think Matt loved Arthur, right? And I was kind of hit and miss on Arthur. I like Village Preservation, but I kind of like different versions of the Kinks better. I don't know if the Kinks, through the prism of horns and some of the stuff Matt doesn't like, is going to connect with him as much. And you know what, Matt? I've set the table for you. Why don't you go second? What were your thoughts on this album?
All right, so first of all, I like this better than ska, so I appreciate that.
Because it's not ska.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's not ska in any. There's nothing ska on this entire album.
No, their first album was. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
I like this better.
Yes.
I like this better than the ska that they were doing on their first album. This album, I really struggled just trying to get a read on this album the whole week. This album might be the definition of a thumbs in the middle album for me, mainly because I don't really know what to make of this. I absolutely got the Kinks out of this. I got some Beatles out of this too. And I thought, hearing that initially, thinking, I think I might really like this album. And the more I listened to it, the more I just felt okay on. I didn't really find myself gravitating strongly in any one direction. I think there were a couple of parts. I think it's, what is it? Mr. Speaker Gets the World. There's something about that, the horn parts of that, which was kind of a cool, a unique part.
That's the most
that I
like
there.
What they sounded like on their first album. That and
real,
that
yeah. There's just
song,
something about the chord progression with that I really liked. And I don't know. I listened to it plenty of times, and I don't know if I ever really got to the point where I was like, I really like this, or I really dislike this. It's kind of just there. There's a lot of, you mentioned horns, John. Yes, that's all over the place. There's a lot of piano on here too. There's a lot of like just banging on the piano, and there's strings too. So it's a very creative record, and it's definitely interesting. But I just find it really strange to just kind of come out of this without a strong feeling one way or the other. It's just it's there. It's like I said, yeah.
Do you think the Britishness of the album is part of the barrier? Because it's a very British album. Yeah, it's possible.
I don't necessarily know if I came out of this going, man, this is too British for me. It was more of just like, there's a lot of. I think it's interesting. I think it's creative. I think it's unique. And I came out with all those things, but it also ended up just being there for me. So I don't know if more listens would help me with this. Maybe more intent listens, because this was, I think, this is a frustrating thing for me. This was an album this was another one of those records that you could not listen to on Spotify or Apple Music for whatever reason, because there's other Madness albums on Spotify, right? The last one we listened to was on there. All the other ones were too, but I had to listen to this on YouTube. And if I was listening to it while I was like, what I do a lot of times when I'm outside walking my dog or whatever, I have to I can't put my phone on sleep, because when you do that, then the music goes away. And then so the screen is open to it. And then if I accidentally touch it, it skips the song. I get all the ads. So it's also a very frustrating listen for me, because I could just listen to it, because it's just on this. I'm using this YouTube app that's not ideal. So I think that has a small thing to do with it, but maybe with the fact that I wasn't able to listen to it that intently. But I definitely heard the Kinks in there, and I do like the Kinks, but I can't really say that I love this record. It's fine, and maybe I need to kind of just sit down with it by itself, not touch the phone, and just let it happen. But I'm definitely thumbs in the middle here. It's a step up from their first record for me. I know it's probably not for you guys, because I know you like ska a lot, but I appreciate the fact that they're doing something totally different too, because I think that's got to be probably difficult for an artist to do, is just be like, all right, now we're going to do something totally different, and that takes guts, and it takes creativity and talent, and these guys certainly have that. But as far as like for my own personal standpoint, it didn't really resonate with me that strongly. So thumbs in the middle for me.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I don't really have a hot take on this. Unfortunately, it sounds like I have similar feelings. It didn't really resonate with me at all. Unlike the Kinks, which I also thought of listening to this, which hooked me right away with their songs and their melodies and their writing. This didn't do that for me. I liked the Madness when they were ska, I think, more than what this is. I think they're
Yeah, I'd
definitely
agree.
they're definitely trying for something, which I respect. And like you said, John, maybe the Britishness of it is something that is keeping me at bay. I didn't read the lyrics when I listened to it. Maybe that would have helped. It's not necessarily a fact of having to relate to what they're doing. I think the music itself just wasn't strong enough for me to make an impact. They do seem to, like you guys said, there is a variety of things they're trying on here. There's definitely some jazz elements I think they're incorporating. Yep. I did like the variety of instruments. You guys didn't mention the incorporating of Eastern music or kind of world music sounds, harkening back to the Beatles and everything else that use that. So they're trying for that as well. I think that's appropriate probably to also, immigration in Britain. There's obviously a large Indian population in the UK because of colonization and or former colonization. And so that was interesting, but for whatever reason, all these elements didn't congeal for me as much. And there wasn't really even that strong of singles outside of Our House, which is far and away the best song. There wasn't even, I think the other singles, Tomorrow's Just Another Day.
Yep.
And that was okay, but there wasn't really anything on here that I felt like was a deep cut or like some secret thing that I would want to put on a playlist or something. It just kind of fell flat for me overall.
Yeah, they actually had some other. I had Total Madness back in the day, their greatest hits album, and they're another one of the bands that a couple of their best songs are not on an album. So they had a song like It Must Be Love, which was a very good. All I could think of was that it wasn't on this album, and it would have fit nicely on this album and been that second single, Josh, that you were looking for, because they've got some songs this era like House of Fun and It Must Be Love, and later they do Wings of a Dove, which I always remember from 10 Things I Hate About You. It's like a very like operatic song, when they're sort of Heath Ledger and Julia Stiles are sort of courting, right? You hear. And it's almost like operatic kind of that song. So there's definitely an ambition with Madness at this point. Now, whether or not that ambition always succeeds, right, is a question left to the listener, right? And for me, I do think, Matt, you made a good point. The biggest difference of this album, besides the obvious pop shift from earlier, is the piano, which was around in the first album a little bit, but here it's right there with the horns as the second instrument. And this is a way more piano driven album than One Step Beyond is. And I think probably where my hierarchy would be on this one in terms of listen. But
and I think it's interesting that Our House, I agree, I really like that song. And it's one of those songs that I've known for so many years. It's just been there, and it's probably for years and years I didn't even know who sang it. It's just a song that was on a commercial or something like that. And so I always knew the chorus, but what I really liked is the verses, because I think the verses are actually the best part of the song. I think the chorus is fine, but I like the verses, like the way the chord progression and the way that flows with the horns and the piano playing and stuff. I think that's the stronger part of the song, actually. And the breakdown's good too. Yeah. So that was kind of like, that's how the song goes, because I just knew the chorus, because that's all they play, really in snippets for commercials or whatever that I hear it from. So that was, I agree. That's a pretty strong song. I did like that.
Okay. Yeah, getting to something you said too, John, there's been a lot of British bands that, we talked about it last week with
New Order.
Yes, New Order. Their singles don't go on to the albums that Americans hear that get released, and they're completely separate entities, and that would never happen nowadays, I feel like.
Well, we did Joy Division for both albums, right? And we didn't even do Love Will Tear Us Apart, which is by far their biggest hit.
I was surprised. I kept waiting. I was like, it's not on the first one. Oh, it must be on the second one. And then it wasn't.
The Smiths are like that too. The Smiths have so many great second singles that Louder Than Bombs, where they're all collected, is considered an album on Best Ever Albums, and it's basically a novel album. So
yeah, I guess I thought when we were doing the 60s, and that happened a lot with The Who and the Beatles and the Stones, that was like, that's just a thing that happened in the 60s. But no, that's certainly carrying over into the 80s too.
Yeah.
You would think they would want to put those on an album when they sell it to
I
America.
think the idea
well, this
is-
album didn't even get released in America, so what are we talking?
Right.
What am I
They
talking?
didn't have a record company at this
Yeah.
point. They didn't get a record company till the next one, I think.
I think part of the reason they did that was to sell more, because you
Yeah.
get, if you sell the album, and then if you want the single, then you got to buy the single too, So I think it was a marketing ploy as well.
I've often heard sometimes the back ends were things the record company didn't think were marketable, but they liked and they believed in. So sometimes they'd stick it as a single and their guess would be right. That was another thing I think that happened sometimes.
Or like Joy Division, which they sold the Blue Monday single in a really expensive sleeve, and they didn't think it would sell, and then it just cost them a shit ton of money. So they sometimes don't expect it, I guess.
It's like Icarus. You reach for for the sun,
Yeah.
and sometimes the wax melts. So
Yeah.
I
so
wonder too. Didn't you say, John, that obviously the Madness were much more popular in Britain than in America?
Well,
And
to give,
I was going to say, have we talked about a band that has been so popular in Britain that has resonated with us? Maybe the Kinks, but
like a band that was more popular in Britain than America.
yeah, but that we all liked and thought
Okay.
should have been a bigger thing. I can't.
Well, I'm trying to think of what are the definitively British bands that didn't have it. The Jam comes to mind, right? Which I don't know if any of us fell in the category of like hardcore fan, right? Mm-hmm. The Kinks would fall in that, and I think we all like the Kinks.
I guess the Buzzcocks maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking the Buzzcocks.
Yeah,
Something
and we
like
did all
that.
love that.
But
Then
there were
there's,
the
like-
British bands that did very well here, like the Stones, the Beatles, the Clash. That
Oasis,
still did.
right?
Yeah, Oasis,
Led
right?
Zeppelin.
But Blur is
if we're
a
talking later, there's a lot. Yeah,
Blur is a perfect example of a band that I knew nothing about outside of Song 2, and they seem to be in this vein of what you were saying, of being very British, describing British life, and being much more popular over there than
Well, and
here.
there's more bands in the 80s that are going to be like the Happy Mondays comes to mind, right? Like another band that was big in Britain, but not as big. The Pogues, right? I think they're Scottish or Irish. I can't remember which, but so there is that lane. Just like there's bands that are big in America that really don't travel outside of America.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I would say thumbs in the middle for this one for me. Maybe even slightly leaning a touch down because just nothing really hooked me at the level where it invited more re-listens than what I did. So
yeah,
And maybe that's what it comes down to. Even though it sounds like the Kinks had better songs. It goes down to songwriting or just melody or production, perhaps. I don't know, but it did that certainly they certainly resonated more with me than this.
Yep. Yeah, it wasn't an album that I wanted to re-listen to or felt like there was something there that I was missing or wanting to discover. It just kind of, I ran through and I was like, okay, that was all right.
Okay.
But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. That puts a bow